let's get started without further ado. Welcome tonight. I have Katherine Stievater, and help me if I'm wrong.
You did it.
She is the founder of Gap Year Solutions, and she's been doing many years worth of helping families figure out great gap year solutions for their kids. And so I'm going to let her just take it over, and I'll monitor the questions, and hopefully we can get them all answered throughout the course of the night.
Great. And Susan, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here with all of you. I would prefer to be in Chicago right now. I love Chicago. I'm calling from Boston. We're having a snowstorm right now. I don't know how you guys are doing with the snow out there, but I like the snow, so it's kind of fun. Anyway, I am a gap year advisor, and what Susan had said. And for any of you who don't know what a gap year advisor is, think of a college counselor, and I help kids figure out their gap year plans, just like college counselors help students figure out their college situations. I'm passionate about gap years, and more than ever, look at the title of our talk tonight. There's so many reasons to consider it. So think of me as, like, I always feel like I'm the interrupter of, sure, you can go right to college, or you could take a gap semester or a gap year. You don't have to follow the herd, or you could, if you feel like you're ready to go, then go for it. But tonight I want to get through some points really that you might not know about gap years. So normally I spend a lot of my time actually traveling around the country. So I've been stuck in this little office for a year, like we all have. And when I travel and doing these Zooms, quite often, I'm trying to help educate not just families and students, but also counselors and high school counselors and college counselors. And because I feel like it's, these kids need to know that it's a real option, and you parents do as well. And it really is a viable option. I also do mentoring. A lot of kids at this point are sick of their parents. I'm not sure, again, Susan's going to let me know if there's any students on the call tonight, but sometimes your student doesn't want to necessarily listen to you as a parent.
There are sophomores, juniors, and seniors all on tonight. So,
oh, perfect. Yes, I'm so happy that there are sophomores too. Okay, great. So I also mentor students throughout their gap time. Along with all of that, I'm also the mother of 4 boys. So we're almost a basketball team. I guess my husband makes it 5. So, and just kind of fun, I'm actually 5'7", so you can only imagine the size of my kids. I get kids. I love kids. And my boys have kept me running, I have to say. My oldest son actually spent his junior year of high school in Spain. He lived with the host family, went to an international school, and just got out of our little town outside of Belmont. He just was very global, and he just had an amazing experience. My second son, I kind of smile when I talk about him because he took a gap year. And I think I'm so passionate about what I do because I'm watching him grow as an adult now. And it all started really for him. It stemmed from his gap year. On his gap year, he took it right after high school. He worked. We actually, we vacationed in Maine in the summertime, and he's always worked at this hotel for the last 3 summers. And during his gap summer, he basically would let him stay up there until the end of October. They were always looking for help. And so he had 4 different jobs. He was juggling working on the beach, working in the restaurant, catering weddings, working in the general store. He was like the jack of all trades. The cool part the reason why I'm telling you this is he lived alone. He had a bicycle. He had to cook his own meals, shop for his own meals. He had to do his own laundry. He had to make sure he wore the right uniform, and he had to get himself up in the morning. So all of those I consider life skills. And when I think of gap years, I feel like my goal when I work with students, and my goal, and the reason why I founded my company, is I'm trying to help high school students transition to college successfully. And what does that really look like? So continuing down the line here, I have a sophomore in high school and a senior in high school. So all of you parents are out there that are seniors, parents of seniors, I can relate to you. I am one of them. And we've had pretty much only online learning here in the Boston area. A few mornings a week for the last probably 3 weeks. The kids have gone in for a couple of mornings, but it's been crazy out there. And all you kids on the call tonight, I feel for you. It's not normal. We're going to get through it. But if you are a senior, it's a good thing to think about. How do I see myself next year? And we don't really know what's going to happen next year. So let's talk about tonight. Tonight, I'm going to just cover the basic definition of a gap year, the many benefits of a gap year. I could speak all night on that. And the myths, some people have this idea of what a gap year is. I'll tell you, and I'll actually demystify those myths tonight. How do you structure a gap year? I mean, there's so many options, right? And how do you dwindle it down to make it a year that's actually doable and not so overwhelming? And then how do gap years relate to the college planning process? So I will go through all of those. I expect to hopefully not talk more than 20, 25 minutes, but I do have a lot of information tonight. So let's get started. What is a gap year? So my very simple definition is it's an intentional time off from traditional academic studies. It doesn't have to be a year. It could be a semester. Any kid can take a gap year. There's no set gap year. I think of it as a discovery year. Like, who am I year? Like, if I'm going to go to college or that's my next choice, who am I? Like, I don't even know. I haven't had a chance in high school to even figure that out. And in general, I have to say, even before COVID, gap years had really started to pick up in popularity as far as people have been starting to discover them and thinking, maybe I as a student should consider this, or parents are thinking, what is the gap year? What is it all about? So it's really been happening before COVID. And why is that? And honestly, I love this slide because if you're a high school senior right now, this may feel like you. And, seniors, by the time you're a senior, sophomores and juniors, you have a couple more years here, but you've been on this track for probably 13 years by the time you're a senior, right? So it's almost like you're on a race. And you got through elementary school and you got through middle school and then you got through high school. And it's like, what is the race? What are we racing to? And what it seems like is a lot of us are racing to college. And that's a great place to be. And that's a great place to go. But are you ready to go? If you had a chance to even figure out why you're going, have you asked yourself that question? Or are you going just because you're supposed to go? So, it's really hard though, to take a step off that basically traditional path. It's hard. It takes courage. I think one of the positive things, and I'll talk about my son a lot tonight because I live with him. He actually took another gap semester. He just went back to college a week ago online, but he's going to live with some friends. First semester, he decided, Mom, I'm just taking a gap semester. I don't want to do online learning in college again. But what it did for him is after he took his first gap year, he came to me and said, I don't have to be on a path now. I've decided to get myself off that path. So it's such a priceless gift that he gave to himself because now, he's 22 years old. He's like, I don't care if I graduate when I'm 23 or 24. I don't care. I'm on my own path. And it's so rewarding and so empowering to watch it. So in general, many kids will still go to college and, in the country, it was about 2%. Last year, there was about 7 or 8% of students took a gap year. And this is what colleges are saying. This is now 4,000 colleges in the US. And here are some stats. This is the average now. Up to 33% of freshmen do not return for sophomore year. And out of those 4,000 universities, the average, only 59% of students who enroll are ever going to graduate. And if we were in person, I'd have you raise your hand and say, how many years is the average graduation rate? And you would say 6. And I think the crazy thing is, first of all, if you look at this slide, what are we doing? I mean, these kids are going to school and it's like they're washing out. Second comment I want to say is, when I say 6 years, it's not that uncommon now. I mean, people are kind of expecting to hear that, which when I, went to school and it was, you went to 4 years, maybe an extra semester. I said to my own kids, I have 4 kids to put through college. I said, I do the 4-year system. I don't do 5, I don't do 6, I do 4 years. So just really think about this and really think, are you as a student ready? Or do you think your student is ready to really be the best they can when they step on a college campus? Are they going to take advantage of all the opportunities on a college campus? Are they going to go to the clubs? Are they going to really attend other classes? Are they going to wake up in the morning? Are they going to be able to schedule their time? When you think about it, these high school students, you're in school probably 6 hours a day. This is way before COVID. I don't know. My kids are in school. I don't even know, asynchronous and whatever. But in general, high schools, 6 hours a day. When you think about college, it's about 12 hours a week. So there's a lot of hours that students really need to fill productively. Have fun too, but make use of the crazy price tags that we're paying. So let's talk about the benefits of a gap year. And I would say by far maturity is top of the list. And I think of that almost as the teenage brain. You guys, if you're parents, you know what I'm talking about. Those brains are not fully developed yet. And the studies are saying it's not till these students are 25, 26 that they're fully developed. I always joke and say, I think I'm walking around with like, I'm the frontal lobe of 4 of my own boys. But it's amazing if a student graduates from in June and goes to college in August. They've probably spent, got their dorm comforters and all the paraphernalia they need for their dorm life and maybe a summer job, and they go to college. They're the same kid. If a student does that and then takes a gap year, that's a year and 2 months, their maturity is even higher, even if whatever they've done in their gap year. So what are some of these benefits? Life skills, I will talk about them all over day and night because, when I went to high school, and I'm not that old, we had a home ec class. We had a class on how to change tires, and we had carpentry, and we had all these like life skill classes. We had a class on how to balance your checkbook. I know kids probably don't even know what a checkbook is anymore, but we had like real learning and real world experiences in high school. They don't have that anymore in most high schools across the country. So, I think the idea of learning to cook, I'll say to some of my kids, if you're home for part of your gap year, why don't you cook a meal a week for your family? Go to the store, use a budget. How much does it cost to cook a meal? Come up with a new recipe, learn to cook. What about laundry? Figure out laundry. I have some kids that are getting their driver's license in their gap year because they didn't have time in high school. Just basic life skills. And I think the financial part is really, really important, and it can be kind of fun, right? I think sitting down and understanding what it's like to budget, what it's like to have a job and put some money in the bank and keep some money and all of that. I think it's really, really important. And I also think, I guess, problem solving when I work with students is probably the most rewarding benefit. Because when you think about high school, we as parents are, advising our kids constantly of what's right, what might not be a great choice. Their teachers are telling them what they have to study, what they're doing. They have coaches and different adults in their lives that are really helping them. So I don't believe that too many students actually have had the time to really problem solve and really make their own decisions. And then we put them on a college campus and we think that everything's going to be okay. They're going to be able to do the academics and do all these life skills and manage everything, and they're all set. Well, if you look at the slide the slide that I showed you a couple slides back, no, we're not all set for some kids. I was in Connecticut, I guess it must have been about a year and a half ago now, at a big, huge college fair in an arena. Gosh, you can't go to an arena anymore right now, but someone from the Princeton Review was following up after my presentation, and he said to me, we just did a study, and do you know what the number one reason why kids drop out of college? And his answer, which was the number one answer from the study, was lack of non-academic skills, which was pretty enlightening. And I said to him, well, that's a gap year. And he, of course, agreed. So going on, I think this is also a time in this year where nobody knows this student. For instance, I think of when you're in high school, either you've been with these same kids all through high school or since, grade school, since you're in kindergarten. And sometimes kids have labels, whether it's the smartest kid in the class or the athlete or the kid that does drama or the math team kid, whatever you are, there is some sort of label. And I think of this, this gap year as a time to just kind of start with a new slate. Nobody knows you. And it's really, really exciting for these kids. I think of all you students, and hopefully you'll get into some colleges of your choices this year. And it's exciting. And many students will go and buy a sweatshirt or a t-shirt. A big name of it will be on their t-shirt or whatever school they're going to. And I always say to these students, who's the kid underneath that sweatshirt? Yes, you got into Colby or Rutgers or Northwestern or wherever, but you are more than the name of the school that you worked really hard to get into. And this is such a great time for these kids to figure out who their authentic self is. I focus a lot, and I'm sure all of you parents do, especially now with really the health, whether it's dealing with concussions and some physical health, or whether it's anxiety or any mental health issues, whether it's depression or eating disorders or whatever. There's a lot going on in high school age kids right now. And to have these kids feeling really good and healthy before they step on a college campus, I think is such a benefit. I know years back when my oldest son was going to college and I was looking at colleges with him, they would always show us the career center. And then fast forward, I don't know, 7 years or so. Now what's on college campuses, which I'm thrilled about, is the wellness centers. We never used to have those. But I love the fact that we're talking about mental health. It's more of a common ground right now. But in a gap year, it's just a great time for kids to just make sure they're feeling good. And finally, a huge benefit, I saw it again through my own son, is college focus. And when I'm talking about that, I mean, during their gap year, kids are doing different experiences. They're having different opportunities that they would never have had before. So they may study and take different and figure out what major they might want to consider or what career they might want to think about. And when they get to college, they're actually more engaged. And I have a slide on that, or maybe I don't have a slide on that. The idea of when the kids go to college, these are studies that I have that are in the gap year world. The kids are going to take gap year. When they go to college, they will actually they'll graduate in 4 years. They're less likely to transfer and they will have a higher GPA. So what it means is when the kids go to college, they stay, and they graduate on time. So they're engaged. And colleges love gap year kids. And why not? Because when you think about it, they're a year older. They tend to be more leaders on campus and they're more focused. They actually are more engaged in class and they want to be there. My own son, when he was taking his gap year, two things here. After 3 weeks of him working in a restaurant, he said, "Boy, Mom, I didn't realize that going to college was a privilege. So check that off. Of course it is." And the end of his gap year in August, he had said, "I'm really excited to study again. I was just so burned out." There are many reasons why kids are taking gap years. They're burned out. They don't know why they're going to college. And right now, we'll talk about COVID in a minute, because that's a huge reason why kids right now are taking gap years. But, even though I think there's so many benefits, there's also some misconception about gap years. And I want to go through a few of those tonight. So the first one that I get a lot is, you know what, it's just too expensive and we can barely afford college. How are we going to afford a gap year? So if you learn one thing tonight would be anyone can afford a gap year. Your gap year costs what you can afford. So students can make money in their gap year to help pay for college. Students can work to maybe help pay for travel or other experiences they want to have. If they do want to do a structured gap year program, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, some of those programs have scholarships. So the sooner that you apply for them, the better. And a lot of students will just, you don't have to necessarily travel. So your gap year is just what you can afford. I love this student right here. She actually makes me smile because she decided on her gap year, this was 2 years ago, she wanted to travel to Latin America. So the first semester, that was going to be second semester. And first semester, she was taking a class in writing and she was a dancer. So in the mornings, she had nothing to do. And I said, okay, we got to fill up this time because a gap year has to have a structure and there has to be a plan. So I said to her, what about a job? And she looked at me like I had 4 heads because she had never had a job before. So her mother said, oh gosh, that's not going to work because I've had to get her out of bed every single morning of high school, drag her out of bed. She's late for school every day. There's no way she's going to be able to show up and work in a restaurant or a retail store in the morning. That's not going to work. Well, she's smiling there. She had an amazing experience. She wasn't late one day for work. Her boss said she was by far the best employee he's ever had. And she went to work because she wanted to go. She felt, she had a purpose. And I think a lot of things that kids don't necessarily have in high school, other than doing their work and maybe their sport or their activity, like they don't necessarily feel maybe they have a purpose. Like, what am I all about? She knew her customers knew her. And, after she left, she texted me when she was in Latin America and she said, it's going to sound really crazy, but the first 2 weeks, I really missed my colleagues at the coffee shop. So I think having a job and a gap year is such a great aspect. It's learning about a resume. It's learning how to actually apply for a job. It's learning about having an interview for a job and making sure you have the right uniform or, showing up on time. All of those, ticking all of those aspects of a job. A lot of kids have never done it. So why not learn all about that in your gap year? So when you have your job in the college age or beyond, you've already gone through it before. Okay, myth number 2. and I kind of mentioned this before, it's all about adventure and travel. Everybody thinks that gap years are about you need to go to an expensive program and it's probably in New Zealand, or you're going to hike the Himalayas and it's going to cost a lot of money, and that's a vacation. So I can tell you right now, that's not all about gap years at all. I have a lot of students that don't want to travel, and that's just great. And so I have these students up here. The student in the top left, he started a company, a sneaker company, when he was in high school. So during his gap year, he actually wanted to see if this company would actually really work if he put some time into it. So he took a community college class in New York City. This company so grew. I mean, it was so exciting for him that now he actually has moved out to LA to pursue his company. The student at the bottom left, he had 3 very unique internships. He didn't really know what he wanted to study in college. He got into a great school. It's one of his top choices. And he worked at 3 different companies, and he decided which type of business he was interested in. He lived at home. He had some friends. He was happy as a clam, and he was working these internships. I think 2 of them were paid internships. So he actually got some money and actually was a kind of a business-minded student. So this was a great gap year for him. And the bottom left student, I will say in general, I will always recommend that students apply to college as a senior. Now, you don't have to. And there's a few more students nowadays that I'm working with that decided to wait. And this particular student decided to wait. He had said, why would I apply to college if I have no idea what I want to do? And I have no idea where I'd want to apply, which makes a lot of sense. So in his gap year, he actually took an EMT class, and he loved it, and he got certified as an EMT. And during that first semester, he goes, I think I really like this. I want to apply to nursing school. So he applied to 5 nursing schools. He got into all of them, and he was able to work part-time to help pay for his nursing school. So I think of him right now, and he's like, if I hadn't taken that gap year, I never would have been doing this. So just another experience there of non-travel. So students on the call tonight, FOMO, my own kids thought I was pretty cool having this slide here. I got this a lot, and it's a real feeling that students have. Oh, I don't want to take a gap year because then I'm going to be behind. All my high school friends are going to graduate, and I'm going to be a year off, and they're going to have their jobs, and I'm going to be in college. Well, that all is that's not happening right now with COVID. COVID has completely changed that. So FOMO, honestly, this past year and probably going into next year for sure, that's not going to be a problem. There are kids that they're taking a whole year off in college. There are kids that are taking a semester off. There's kids that are taking a gap year from high school. So it's really not nearly as much of a big deal that I want you students on the call to think about. But in general, students will say when they step on a college campus now that some of their freshman friends are actually envious. Like, hey, how did you figure that out? That's really pretty cool that you did X, Y, and Z before you went to college. And whether they're 19, there's no penalty if you start college at 19. There's no one that says 18 is when you really have to start college, or the 19-year-olds, that's not right. Because when you really think about in Europe, gap years are almost like a rite of passage, right? And in Australia, the same way. They basically are kind of laughing at us like, we're sending your kids to college when they're 18. That's crazy. So gap years really immerse very quickly when they get into a college campus. I've never had a student that said, oh my gosh, worst year of my life. I wish I never did that. It's always the opposite. And the only regrets I ever hear are from parents that say, you know what, I knew my student could have really used it. I wish I had supported him throughout that process. Or students that say, I wish I had done it. Because if you really think about it, you only get one shot at being a freshman. So I'm trying so hard to have students be the best they can and be excited and really like fire in your belly when you get to, you're studying again. So it's another 4 years of academics. And it does require courage. I talked about that a little bit before. This year, again, with COVID, so many kids are doing it that it's not as, you're still courage. You're going to be off that path a little bit, but, you have to own it. If you choose to take a gap year, this is not your parents' choice. This is your choice. You have to be intentional about it. You have to buy into it. And the last myth here will be, I'm just not that gap year kid. And these are some of my past students, and every single kid is different. There is no one gap year kid. It's just trying to, get out of your comfort zone, figure out who you are, take some risks in the sense of, safe, like with safety included. And again, this is not a vacation year. I think sometimes, college is a much easier, it's a much easier path, right? Just keep going. Everyone else is going to college. I'm just going to go to college. I'm not going to even think about why I'm going because I'm supposed to go. Well, no, you're not. You're supposed to go if you're ready to go. I think of the price of college right now. Um, you want to be able to make the most of that. Other than a house, I don't know what else costs as much as college education. So let's get to the fun stuff now. What can you possibly do during a gap year? And I put this in 6 different buckets to make it a little bit easier for you to understand. However, the sky's the limit here, and I really do mean that. So there's work and internships that I've already gone through, service and volunteer, language and cultural immersion, travel and adventure, farming and wildlife, marine life, art, music, and dance. And within all of these buckets, there's hundreds of options. So these are just what the majority of students are doing on their gap year. Okay, so here is a slide of, this is pre-COVID. So these are some experiences, and I'll go a little bit of detail of the types of options here. So when I think of, I've already talked about the whole idea of work. I think that's actually a great option for at least some part of your gap year. Internships, I had spoke that the student that I'd worked with, he had 3 different internships. Believe it or not, there were a lot of internships during COVID, and I'll talk about those. But the internships before COVID, it's a great way for students to learn to network. I mean, you can do that during COVID as well, but kids were networking. That's how the student found his internships. It was all through networking. Also, during a gap year, it's a time for students to figure out what they like and what they don't like. So that student and holding the monkeys on the top, she thought she wanted to go to veterinarian school. So she spent a whole semester in South Africa, and she worked at a sanctuary where there were baboons and monkeys. As you can see from the picture, she was having a heyday. She loved it, and she's in vet school right now. And the reverse side of that, a student that was always wanted to be an investment banker since he was in middle school, and he was able to find a boutique small investment bank, and he worked there for 12 weeks. So I said to him, "How did that go?" And he said, "I don't ever want to be an investment banker. It's not what I thought it was going to be." So we don't know what he was given to do as an 18-year-old, but in general, his ideal job maybe will be not quite so high up there. Maybe he'll think about studying something different when he goes to college. There's also types of travel. And if all of you have heard of structured gap year programs, they were created for just this age group, the 18 to 22-year-old age group. And a lot of them initially had been created in Europe and in Australia. That's really where gap years, started. But since then, there's also been some programs that were created that the home base, the headquarters were in the US, but most of them, many of them were abroad. So these programs have 2 or 3 structured leaders. It's a great way for a student to learn to travel. They go over the visas and the passports and what's it like to be immersed in a new culture, currencies, and language immersion, and all of that. It's just a fantastic and a way for students to know all the safety risks and just being with another cohort of students. A lot of kids want to travel, but they don't necessarily want to do it on their own. So some of these structured programs are amazing, and they're all over the world. And there's also the option of traveling independently. So if a student has not traveled independently before, I do recommend a structured program to start with, and then maybe second semester, do some more independent travel. You'll learn how to travel at that point. There's also language immersion. Students want to, really dive into whether it's Spanish or French or whatever language they want. They can live with the host family, take classes, and really get immersed in the language. It's super different than study abroad junior year, because a lot of the times when these kids in college are studying abroad, they're living with other college kids. So they're speaking a lot of English. When you do a gap year program, for the majority of these programs, you're living with the host family. So you're really diving into the language and the culture. So there's, again, different opportunities with travel. There's also something called woofing, which is a really affordable way to work on organic. It's called woofing, which is working on organic farms. Students will actually work on a farm for 4 to 5 hours a day. Each farm is a little bit different, and you have free room and board. So it's really affordable. It's in the United States as well as all over the world. So these are just some opportunities of certification, scuba certification. There's, again, EMT, there's lifeguard, there's the outdoor wilderness certifications, lots of certifications, and lots of way to these students were traveling and just getting away. So then you're going to ask, okay, what could you possibly do? That was a question I got probably twice a day since March, literally. What could you do in a gap year if you can't travel? And I kind of looked at them like, there's so much to do, because in general, when I work with students, I think travel is awesome. I think it's great, but I never was the person that said, oh, you have to travel in your gap year. You have to do what the student wants. It's all about your interests as a student and your goals. What do you want to get out of this gap year? And what are your interests? So I have to say, I have been thoroughly impressed with all of these students that decided to take a gap year this year. And in general, these students have been so happy and they're thriving. You can imagine they had been in their homes since last March. And so for the students that chose, I don't want to go to college, I don't know what that hybrid's going to look like. And then it turns into be all online, or some of these colleges were so strict with what the kids could do. They had to be. I mean, they had to be really as safe as possible. So it just, for some kids, it just was too much. And so as I said before, some kids ended up by taking this semester off, not doing the online. But these kids, I'm just amazed. They were so resilient. And if they were on these programs, they were adaptable, completely adaptable. And they were just excited to get away from their parents for a little while. And the parents were excited to get them out of their house for a little while. And to me, the silver lining about COVID is when years ago, I said, how come there are not more US based programs? Our country is beautiful. And there's so many different cultures in our own country. And kids would just go abroad, and that's where all the programs were. Well, guess what? There's a lot more programs in the US now. A lot of these international programs had to pivot, and they did a wonderful job actually, having their companies in the US. So some of these US based programs that never even had US based programs are now in the US. And these kids are doing everything from, conservation to activism to, working with marine life to permaculture and just all these different arts and culture and lots of different programs. And they ran. And these programs had a quarantine. They worked together as a pod. So they were only between 10, 12, maybe 14 kids. So they traveled together. They were not in the cities. They were really remote. They were trying so desperately hard, which they did a fantastic job at, not infecting other people in the different states. These programs were in Hawaii. They were in the West Coast. They were up in Maine. They were down in North Carolina. There were a few programs that were in Ireland and Israel. And they worked. I mean, Ireland never closed their borders. Israel had not. And now currently, Israel has closed their airports. I think the 22nd of February is when they're going to open up again, but they still have gap year students. So looking at these options, there were kids that worked for AmeriCorps, outside trail work. Obviously this year with the election, a lot of students wanted to work on their local campaigns. I also had students that actually were so creative and they started their own companies. I have a student that started a mobile car wash company. He got his own website, he did his own marketing. I have a student who was trying to get funding from VCs for an app that he created. He was in college and realized that, I have a really cool idea for a roommate situation in college. I want to create an app, and he's in the middle of doing that. So lots and lots of different options. I think also one that you can probably relate to, depending on what Chicago's like with their school system. I'm not sure per se, but I have a student that was in Bethesda, and she worked with 4 different families, and all the second graders came and they sat outside underneath an umbrella, a big umbrella and a picnic table, and she helped them. She was their teacher's assistant. So for 6 hours a day, she worked with these 4 different second graders on their Zooms. So they had 4 different teachers, second grade teachers. So she was the one having to help them be focused. And then she did their recess and after school little activities. And she's like, wow, this is crazy, but I actually love it. So she's thinking of now actually thinking about teaching. So again, these kids were creative, and there's just lots of different options, and it's being creative. There was online situations, there were online activities. Some kids would be okay with that, just adding it in. If you had a job locally, there were still jobs out there. Maybe something online just to add something else to be with other gap year kids. I also had students that were doing international internships, which I think is amazing. One of my students was actually working in Ecuador. He wanted to brush up on his Spanish. And so he was learning all the language in soccer because he was a big athlete. So he was doing Zoom sessions. He was teaching these little kids soccer techniques and soccer skills in Spanish in his bedroom to Ecuador. Another student did another online internship in Morocco. So there's lots of opportunities to do. It's just a matter of being creative. So I've been speaking a lot about all these different opportunities and how do you figure it out and how do you not get overwhelmed? So when I work with students, I think of a gap year as just like a college year. First semester, 1 or 2 experiences, and then home for the holidays, or if you haven't traveled anywhere, just sort of relaxing, regrouping. You want to see your friends that went to college, you want to hang out with your family, and then second semester, 1 or 2 activities. So it's not overwhelming. Students are getting a lot of a mixture of different types of activities, but sometimes students will say, I have so many things I can't wait to do. Other students will say, I don't even know what to do. But I think, dwindling it down to, 4 or 5 experiences over the year, I think is a good number. So here's just an example of what students have done. There was a student that worked for a political campaign, and then he worked at Starbucks. He basically said, gosh, Starbucks is a lot harder to work at than I thought. He was really impressed and he worked really hard there. And he also taught skiing, cross-country skiing to some kids. So he made some extra cash. With that cash, he spent the spring hiking the Appalachian Trail, and he used his money to pay for food and his accommodations. So that gap year literally cost nothing. And if you think about those 3 really different experiences, he stepped on college campus, just a completely different human than he would have if he had just gone right from high school. I have a student that also worked as a lifeguard, got trained, worked a ton of hours as a lifeguard, and then he did farming in Western Massachusetts at a maple syrup farm. He was doing woofing. And he liked it so much that he spent his second semester out in California at a winery. So again, really, really affordable gap year. Didn't cost him much at all. Actually, he made some money on his gap year, and he started U Chicago. So anyway, these are just some examples of how you can set up the gap year. Now, when I think about COVID and I think about travel, because a lot of us at this point, again, I don't promote any programs, but I promote the student and what they want to do. But I would think that at this point, I'm really gearing towards these kids maybe getting out of their houses. I have 3 kids that are at home. One of my college kid just left about a week ago to do online learning where he goes to school, but I still have 2 high school kids and I'm done. It's time for them to leave. But if you do want to travel, it's so important to have different scenarios. So a plan A could be international travel. Right now, there are some more companies that are opening up. I mean, countries, not companies, countries that are opening up. I mentioned Israel and Ireland. Costa Rica is open, Thailand's open. Then we have Jamaica's opened. It's every couple of weeks, I'm hearing more countries that are opening up. So there is a great option to be able to travel. That's the plan A. The plan B is, maybe it's just safe to make it a domestic travel opportunity. Now that you can dream and you can you can hope that plan A works, but rely on your plan B. Domestic travel has not shut down yet, and hopefully it will never shut down at this point. But we no crystal ball here. I always also say have a plan C, because again, this whole virus has changed us so dramatically that we just don't know. So you might have to stay closer to home for one part of your year. Plans change, right? And I always say to students, life in the real world experience is that I love these gap years for. Life changes. We don't know what's going to happen. So have different scenarios and different plans, and that's going to make you become more adaptable and flexible in your life. So talking about planning. So sophomores and juniors on the call tonight, you will be starting your college applications as a senior in September. So some kids are starting their, maybe their essays or taking tests in junior year, maybe working on your essays the summer before senior year. But in general, September to January is when college bound kids in high school will be doing their applications. December through March is when, whether you apply early decision or early action, that's when you'll be hearing back about your acceptance or not. And then in January through May, regular decision are given out to students. And usually it's May 1st is the big deadline. Well, last year during COVID, it was a lot of schools went to June 1st, or I think some schools were even June 15th. We don't know that per se, but that's the plan of how college applications work. Now, how does that relate to the gap year? So I love the fact that there are sophomores on the line tonight, because I talk about gap years, I think, as early as freshman year or even in middle school. But, as a freshman thinking like, what's a gap year? You just have the word out there. As a sophomore, you can think of it a little bit more, like a little bit more detail. And as a junior, you can really start thinking, next year I could just work super hard during high school, and then I'll have this year to plan and figure out what I want to do. So November to April, I don't bother students really too much the first part of their senior year, unless they want to have it as a carrot. They're excited to kind of work a little bit to try to start planning their gap year. But in general, I say to students that are seniors, get your applications done, work as hard as you can on them, because they're kind of a drag. So just work at them, and then after you finish those, then you can really start planning your year. So planning it by April. I like to have the plans done for at least the fall semester. And by May, you put your money down for your college. And more than ever for this year, if you're thinking of a gap year, colleges are still going to accept many gap year kids. So just apply to have a deferral as soon as you possibly can, because I do think that in this coming fall, if not more, at least the same amount of number as gap year kids that will be asking for a deferral. And many, I would say most, in the 90% of private schools will accept a gap year. The UC schools will not. They love gap year kids, but they had, UCLA actually had 140,000 applications this past year. So they're not going to, you have to just reapply in your gap year. But what I'll say is, once you put your money down May 1st, or whatever the deadline is, then again, call up the actual colleges, and I'll talk about the deferral on the next slide, to make sure that you actually get your letter in by the deadline. I always say start your plan. I always work with students and making sure their plans start before their friends go off to college. So they have something to look forward to. They have their adventure or their activity or whatever they're doing, to say, like, I'm starting mine, August 25th, and their friends can go off, the week later. But it's not, I always say to students, you're not going to wake up in September playing Fortnite or on your phone, sleeping in, and just saying, yeah, I'll figure out my plan, some middle of September. No, that's a vacation. So having it figured out before you graduate from high school, I think, is a really important idea. And again, plans do change. So just you have to adapt the plans. And the college deferral process, basically, you have to understand every single college is different. And some schools will say, you know what, you can take a gap year. And most private schools, like, again, will take gap years, but they have their own deadlines. So have the student call up the admissions office once you're accepted. And if you're a sophomore or a junior and you think, I really want to take a gap year, call the admissions office and say, what is your deferral process? And do you accept gap year students? Because there are a few here and there that don't accept gap year, like Temple University in Pennsylvania. They don't accept gap year kids. I don't know why, but they don't. So there's, some various schools that will not accept gap years. But just make sure you know their deadlines. You put your deposit down, you write your letter. Every school will be different. Some schools want to talk, have an email exchange a couple of times throughout the year. Other schools want to see, what you're doing. What is your plan? And you write down why you want to take a gap year, why you'll be a better person on their campus because of your gap year. And I've never had a student that was not granted a gap year. So you just have to go through the right process and make sure you hit all the deadlines. And finally, I've done a lot of talking tonight. I get this question all the time: what does a gap year advisor do? And I answer and listen a lot, answer a lot of questions from these kids, and just listen. I really want to understand what are the students' interests and goals, and revisit that throughout their year. Have you checked off some of your interests and goals? And that's really important, to keep going back and making sure that this is a really, really productive and purposeful year. I help students develop their activities, their program. It's their year, right? I put the student in the driver's seat and the parents are in the back seat for once, right? Parents have to be on board, and parents are approving all this, but we talk about budget and boundaries. So when I work with students, I'm working with them and they're making the decisions, which is really, really powerful for them. I also spend a lot of my time vetting programs. So I know the directors, I know the alum. You can easily Google programs as well. And sometimes you don't know, what the websites are beautiful, but you don't necessarily know what type of program and their safety and the risk management factors of these programs. That's a kind of a cool part of my job when it's not COVID. I was in Ireland and Italy a year and a half ago. I was in Argentina, I think about 2 summers ago now. So I love to pretend I'm a gap gapper when I'm on these site visits, so I can really feel like this is what it would be like to have to, be a gap student, and share that with families. And finally, I actually serve as the coach for these kids. I was talking about this before, but my own kids don't want to necessarily listen to me at all, what I say, but other students will. I'm not their parent. I am not their therapist. I am a person that loves gap years, and I really get kids. So I feel like students right now, they need an adult other than their parents throughout this year to help them and have someone accountable to, and have check-ins, and be excited with them. So I do that with my students throughout the year. So this is my contact sheet. So if you have any more questions, if you don't have any questions tonight, or you want to reach out to me, feel free. I'm happy to talk about gap years all day long. And I think that Susan has put my information in the chat, and I am now going to stop share. So there we go.
And that was great information. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, and I'm going to go ahead and let everybody unmute yourself. And why don't we start with, if anybody wants to ask any audience questions right now, let's open up the floor so Catherine can answer them. So one question that we did get in chat is, can you take a gap year at any point during college? Can you do it like between this junior and senior year? Is there any special time that would be better than another time?
Absolutely not. I have to say there's a lot of kids this past year as juniors took a gap year because they did not want to not be on campus for their senior year. So there's no time, no set time. You can take a gap year when you're a parent. I mean, I could take a gap year. There's no set time, no. And on a serious note, a lot of students in college are taking gap years and gap semesters. They want to graduate with their friends. They want to be on campus. So it's a really, really good question. And again, there's no set time.
And then another question that we got was, when do kids normally apply? I'm assuming to college. Does it make a difference if you wait till after your gap year, if you're discovering yourself during the gap year? Do you recommend applying before the gap year? What is your recommendation?
I think I touched upon this a little bit. I really recommend to go through the process in your senior year, because when your peers are going through the application process, you have your guidance counselor or your school counselors there to help you. You have your teacher recommendations, you have your guidance recommendations, you have taken those beautiful SAT or ACT tests that we all love so much. You're in that process. So going through the Common App, filling out the Common App, I always say you don't have to push go, but just going through the process will make it a ton easier. So when you are in your gap year, you've already done it before, right? You'll be able to use the same teacher recommendations. At that point, you might have a work recommendation, from a boss that you might want to add, but you don't have to apply as a senior. I just say go through the process so you get used to it. But no, as I said before, there's more and more students that they don't really know what they want to do, and they don't know where they want to go. And this whole year has been so crazy that there's no rush. I mean, the one thing I will say, there's no rush. What is the rush? My son will say his gap year was the gift that keeps on giving. And he believes that. It's at the top of his resume, and it's at the top of all these kids' resumes. So you can apply in your gap year. I just may, if you happen to be traveling and we have all the countries are opened up and we're all over the world again in October, just make sure in your Wi-Fi just to push go. But you can apply early now. You can apply, in October, November, and still, have a lot more time in your gap year. So yeah, don't not take a gap year, or don't think it's going to be the whole first semester is going to be doing your college applications, because that's not the case. You can work around that.
And then I have Beth with her hand up. Did you have a question, Beth? Oh yeah, it says here, when you take a gap year, does the student forfeit any merit scholarships? Great question.
Yeah, really good question. Again, that's every school's different, but every single student I've worked with, they've been granted their merit scholarship in their gap year. FAFSA, you have to reapply, but I can't say for sure you're definitely going to get the merit, but I've never had a student that lost their merit on their gap year. these colleges love gap year kids because they know when they arrive, they're going to be the leaders on campus. They're going to keep their retention rate, which we know colleges want. They don't want those 33% of kids leaving. They want the kids to stay on their campus. And if they have a really good kid and they're excited, they want to take a gap year, they know they're coming back. So, majority of times they will be granted their merit scholarships.
And then another question, can you mention a little more about scholarships? Are you talking, I don't know if it's college scholarships or scholarships for gap year programs.
Okay, so scholarships for gap year programs, if you want to do one of those structured programs, I highly suggest that if you want to apply to one of the programs, to talk to the individual programs about do they have scholarships? Is it need-based? Is it merit-based? Also ask if your student happens to be a great photographer. Some of them are pretty ingenious with coming up with ideas of saving, like a few $1,000s here or there, and you're the photographer on the trip, or you're the blogger on the trip. So if you can be creative with trying to get the price down a little bit, go for it. I mean, there's never any harm in asking about scholarships. I have to say, if you go to Duke 2 years ago started a silent funder. Is that what you call it? Silent angel funder, whatever. This family, their son took a gap year, went to UPenn. Their daughter went to Duke, and they were so impressed with the gap year their son took that they wanted to be able to give that gift to people at Duke. So right now, up to 24 kids will be granted between $5,000 and $15,000 to take a gap year. Now you have to get into Duke, but if you get into Duke, I mean, that's just, these colleges are getting on board with really the benefits of a gap year. So different scholarships are definitely available.
I have another question. Is it best to let colleges know it is your intention of a gap year for admissions? So do you tell them before as you're applying, or do you wait until after you've been accepted?
Well, I hope someday, in 5 years from now, I'll say, yes, tell them right now, but no, don't tell them. Nope. I think if you want to take a gap year, I would see if that school will accept gap years deferrals, but there's no reason to tell them right now. Schools like Middlebury, on their website, they'll say, are you applying for a gap year, or do you want to start in February or a gap semester? So some schools, Colorado College, some specific schools in the US are really gung-ho gap years, but there's no need to tell them up front. Another part that I just thought about, you can use 529 for gap year programs that offer college credit. So that's another nice way to help fund a gap year program.
I have another good question. Is it hard for kids to take a gap year? Do they sometimes get lost and then never get to college? Could it act as an interference to starting college?
Well, and it's funny because that was my myth number 5. Kids that go to take gap years don't end up by going to college. And I took it off because it doesn't happen. And I just said, it doesn't ever happen. It's a good thought process on a parent's point of view. Let's say a kid has his job and it's making money on the job. And it's like, oh, this is awesome. I don't need to go to college. If a kid has chosen to go to college, I think it's 92 or 93% of students that take a gap year within 6 months to a year will be going to college. And then when they go, they'll end up with getting a higher GPA. I also say that kids that don't end up by going to college, that 6 or 7%, they probably would have been washed out anyway, right? They weren't motivated to go to college. Taking a gap year gets the curiosity bug in them. It gives them a break from academics. It heals their brain as far as like the competitiveness and just being so structured and programmed. They kind of get to try new things and not be graded and be curious and figure out new interests and ideas that they never thought about before. So the answer to the question, the long version is they will go to college.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming tonight.
Well, thanks for having me.
Katherine, it was a great presentation full of terrific information. I want to do my gap year now.
I do too. I can't wait.
Well, ironically, my niece is on her way to Costa Rica today to do a gap semester. She's a sophomore at a small liberal arts school and is not wanting to do the virtual online class. And so she's going to take a break and do a semester in Costa Rica. So
Well, good for her. It's probably nice and warm and sunny there.
yeah. So I do have another question. What about the converse? Does a gap year motivate kids to recognize the value of college? So if kids didn't necessarily want to go to college, can the gap year help motivate them to go to college?
Well, that's an interesting question because, with students that, let's say have a minimum wage job, for instance, and that's what they're doing in their gap year. Let's say they're doing that part and they're doing maybe some certifications or something. Um, that might get old. So it might say, you know what, I actually think I want to go to college. Um, so, some kids may start with community college, which is fine, right? Or some kids may want to go to the vocational route, but I don't think that, I think if a kid's motivated to go to college, they will go to college. I also think we talked about the teenage brain. Some kids are just not there yet. So a gap year will just have them, that one more year, their brain will mature and they will mature. They'll grow up if depending on what they're doing. So it's a really good point as far as, yeah, maybe after their gap year, they'll say, actually, I think I want to go to college. It does happen. And I have students that absolutely has happened to. So.
Well, great. Terrific. Well, thank you so much. I hope everybody stays warm tonight and you don't get too much snow in Boston
Well, I
area.
hope that I can be there in person soon.
Oh, Victoria wants to know what programs offer college credit.
Many do. You just, just Google programs. Google is probably the best way, but a lot of the structured programs will offer college credit. It's much more of a common thing because there's more college kids that are actually trying to attend these programs.
I would imagine it's important to make sure that the college that is on the receiving end is going to accept the credit.
Really good point. Yep. Don't assume that whatever college these programs are accredited through, that your college will accept them. Every single thing. If I can't reiterate it enough, check with your individual college about everything gap year related.
All right. Well, great. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate having everybody on board tonight. Catherine's information is in the chat. If you have more questions, I'm sure it's fine if you email them to her. And again, thank you so much, Catherine. It's been a wonderful evening.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Good night.